This week's Parashat is Nitzavim. It is the last Parashat of the year 5779. Nitzavim is always read as the last Parashat of any given year. Many years, it's also read with Vayelech, and this year it is not. Vayelech sometimes is with Nitzavim, sometimes it's after Rosh Hashanah. It depends on the year. And this year, it will not be read because Rosh Hashanah is on a Monday or a Tuesday. This year it happens to be Monday. When it's Monday or Tuesday, so the parashiyot are divided. We're not going to talk about the parashah so much right at the beginning. I'd just like to let everybody know that one of the amazing designs of our current cycle is so that the parashah, which has the commandment to repent, Nitzavim, is always read right before Rosh Hashanah. It's actually quite moving. There's a lot in this week's parasha that is not necessarily new, and someone has to be very careful to see what exactly was Moshe Rabbeinu getting at when he actually reviewed the topics that are in this week's parasha, namely the fact that he describes the end of Jewish history. In the previous parasha, he talks about the Tochacha. He had said, here's what's going to happen if you keep the Torah. All the blessings will come, and if you don't keep the Torah, all the curses and all these terrible things. And now, in a more poetic way, he goes over that yes, if you don't think that this isn't going to happen, because it is going to happen. I was privileged to speak to Reb Asher Baroz this week, who pointed this out. What was Moshe Rabbeinu getting at? And he said that there's a big difference in someone talking from experience. Moshe Rabbeinu in this week's parsha is talking about how eventually people will have that experience. This is Nitzavim, basically says that there will come a time when even the Mark Twains of this world, the foreigners who come from a distant land, will see what happened to the land of Israel, what happened to the Jewish people throughout their exile, and what happened to the land during the Churban, and they will understand, wow, this really did happen. I told someone who was considering committing a certain sin and not understand the consequences, and I explained to him the way consequences of sin work in the Torah. It's not metaphysical. It's not magic. It is not something that perhaps you could get away with, if you don't believe in it. The Torah, when it says that there will be consequences, it's like your dad telling you if you jump in front of a truck, you're going to get hurt. Your dad's not threatening you. He's not trying to discipline you. He's just trying to tell you the results. If you do this, this will happen. Not following the Torah's prescription is not necessarily that God is vicious or is looking to punish people. It's that if you don't do as you're supposed to do, there will be natural consequences. And the natural consequences of the Jewish people not keeping the Torah is eventually that they will not be living in the land of Israel, and that the land will end up thoroughly destroyed. That's what I have to say about the parasha. This week, I want to talk more about some halachot of Rosh Hashanah that came up again this week. Specifically last week, right before Shabbat, I was privileged to see something that strengthened my conviction that certain points I had made in years past and articles I've written about that one could find on my website and, God willing, in forthcoming printed books are 100% true. And that is as follows. I was writing before about the idea of how much we sound the shofar in Rosh Hashanah. And the sages told us that for Yom Teruah, the day of the sounding of the shofar, one should hear the shofar 3 times. And one should preface the actual sound of the shofar, which is called the Teruah, with something called the tikiyah. And the tikiyah is the sound that is simple. It's just what everybody knows as the tikiyah. And because they weren't sure what the Teruah is over the course of all the different wars, a number of wars with the Romans, etc., it sort of got forgotten, and there were 3 major opinions. Those 3 major opinions are what we call Shvarim Teruah, and Shvarim, respectively. And as people who have been in the synagogue know, that's how we blow the shofar. And then there's the idea that we should blow the shofar in the silent Shmon Esrei. The repetition of the Shmon Esrei. And how much we blow in this repetition of the Shmon Esrei is certainly not clear from the Talmud. However, the Gaonim, and after the Rishonim, the Gaonim were medieval authorities. The Gaonim basically start from the year 500 or so and continue for the next 500 years. We get to Rishonim like Rashi and Rambam, for example, Maimonides. And we find that the major opinion was that being that we sound the shofar a total of 30 times before we even begin the Musaf Shmon Esrei, we do not have to sound it so much more when reciting the Shmon Esrei out loud with the leader / reader. Take your pick; it doesn't really matter. It's the same guy. It's the Chazan. And after every one of the major brachot, the Malchiot, Zichron, and Shofrot, he just has to sound one series of the shofar. According to what the Geonim said, it's sufficient after the first bracha, Tekiah, Shvarim, Trua, Tekiah, and then after the second bracha, Tekiah, Shvarim, Trua, Tekiah, and after the third bracha, Tekiah, Trua, Tekiah. And that is what's brought. The Tosafos mentioned that this was a common practice. This is what the Rif mentions. Apparently, the Talmidei, the Rif's own Rebbeim did this. This is the one Maimonides says is the Minhag Pashut. When Maimonides says Minhag Pashut, Pashut doesn't mean like it does in the Gemara, Pshita, or as we say in modern Hebrew, Pashut, it's the simple one, it's the obvious one, or it means it's the common practice. For apparently 1,000 years, this is how they used to do it, bringing us to a grand total of 40 shofar blasts. And Rabbeinu Tam felt that for whatever reason, it's better to just blow Tekiah, Shvarim, Trua, Tekiah after every bracha. Because Shvarim Trua covers all your bases as long as you take a breath between the Shvarim and Trua. And that opinion, which leads to a total of 42 blasts, was the one that was basically accepted by anybody you could find who wrote a Sefer Halacha, like the ones behind us, and who was in Europe. So, for example, the Rosh mentions this as the practice that he endorses. You could find this in Piskei HaRosh. You can find this in the Torah. The Torah was written by the Rosh's son, Rabbeinu Yaakov. You could find this in the Shulchan Aruch as the opinion of the Ramah, Rabbi Moshe Serlis, who was a big posek in Krakow and basically wrote the Ashkenazic side of the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch mentions the opinion of the Rif and Rambam. Blow 40 blasts, how we described after every bracha, Tekiah, Shvarim, Trua, Tekiah, and then after the second one, Tekiah, Shvarim, Tekiah, the third one, Tekiah, Trua, Tekiah. And this is basically the halacha as it was. By the way, this opinion of the Ramah and the Rabbeinu Tam can also be found very clearly among the Chai Adam. It can be found as explicitly endorsed by the Vilna Gaon in his Perush to the Bar-Hayim. And you can see it there. He says, he brings the opinion between the Rif and the Gaonim on one side and Rabbeinu Tam and the Torah on the other, and says Rabbeinu Tam is Nachon Yoter. And that's why you could dig up Ashkenazic Machzorim, and you find them at HebrewBooks.org. You find PDFs of all these things, scanned copies, and indeed that was apparently the practice for most of history that we have called ourselves Ashkenazic Jews. The Tosafos also mentioned an opinion of the Aruch. The Aruch lived in the 11th century in Rome, and Italian jewelry and to even greater extent Romanio jewelry would classically not fit into what you and I call Ashkenazic or Sephardic or Yemenite, for that matter. The decimations of those communities have led to it that we barely recognize a nice Italian Jewish rite. You wouldn't find such a thing anymore. Certainly not. The Romania one is the people who lived in, let's say, the Balkans, in Greece and Bulgaria, Macedonia, places like that. Those communities basically do not exist. And it's a forgotten part of Jewish history that they used to have practices that were radically different, especially in the synagogue, from what you and I can find today in, say, America or in Israel. I don't know if I've never been in any such synagogue. Rabbi Eli Duker has been writing a series of articles about the various practices regarding the readings from the prophets on Shabbatot and still Shabbatot and Yom Tov. I've been collaborating with him. It's been a real privilege to have helped him on these things, and he's found a lot of evidence that show just how different these practices used to be. In the Aruch, you'll find that he believed, and he mentions a practice that they had, to actually blow the shofar 100 times, and to do it in the silent Shmona Esrei also, which is radical because we don't see that in the Gemara. This is something that's not brought by the Rishonim as a psak halacha. Basically, just like before the Musaf, there's 30 shofar blasts, the three different possibilities, each done 3 times, plus their tekiyot. That would be done in Shmona Esrei, after every bracha of the major 3 in the sound Shmona Esrei. And it would be done again in the reader's repetition. This practice that the Aruch basically describes is what you will see in Sephardic synagogue today. It's what the Hasidim do. It's what they do in Nusach Sfard places. And it's also what Rabbi Soloveitchik himself, he was davening Ashkenaz in his place in Boston, believed should be the right way to do it. This opinion has been mentioned. It's in the Tosafos. It's in the Aruch. It was not unknown. It just was not practiced. Like we said, basically the halachic rishonim, the ones who we usually look at when we study halacha, mentioned this practice and discounted it. And there's a long list of the basic halachot. That's why Rif and Maimonides and Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah and the sources of the Ramah do not have such a thing. However, the Shlah, who was of Ashkenazic extraction and moved to Jerusalem, was a Kabbalist, and based on the writings of the Ari, he reintroduced this practice plus a few kavanot. And by the way, I failed to mention, the Aruch says once you've gotten all these 90 shofar blasts, do another 10 afterwards, and that brings you up to 100, and that corresponds to the 100 cries of Sisera's mother, which, as for many of you know, the on-the-go type of question would be, what does that have to do with blowing the shofar? His mother, Sisera, was a Rasha who was defeated in the war by Devorah and Barak way back when. What does that have to do with anything in Rosh Hashanah, or the fact that she cried 100 times and that's why we have to blow the shofar? It's very not clear. And that's another reason. Just because there's a coinciding number there doesn't mean that our practice should somehow reflect that. And then, under the influence of the Shlah introduced many Kabbalistic practices we recognize as Judaism. If you see something in your Siddur, just open it up. The fact that there are prayers before putting on your talit and tefillin, and many other things, that was introduced by the Shlah. The Shlah is the one who popularized the staying up all night on the night of Shavuot. The Shlah popularized Hataras Nedarim on Erev Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, and a lot of other things. I have a general rule. If you study the writings of the Vilna Gaon, you'll find that he would basically not do anything the Shlah said to do, which doesn't make it anything bad. A lot of people do like the Shlah. You can do like the Shlah if you want, just to know what's Shlah and a Kabbalistic practice. And the Shlah himself wrote, he's including these 100 blasts into the prayer service, and that's how he arranged them to do in Jerusalem, although he does not require anybody else to do it, and it's an entirely elective practice. So this is how it stands. This practice has been catching on so much that ArtScroll even has the audacity to declare that this is almost universal Jewish practice, even though historically it is not. And the only question I had, you could get a good machzer, for example, the Goldschmidt machzer. I have not checked I hope Rabbi Daniel Goldschmidt, the professor, is still with us. He put out a machzer a few years ago, which is a critical edition. He points out that is not the Ashkenazic practice. Rav Hamburger at Machon Shilo has also pointed this out. But it's in, let's say, your ArtScroll machzer. And one of the things that was always bothering me for a long time was, so we'll blow the shofar a lot of times. That's what everybody does anyway, so what does it hurt? There were some years people saw me, I blew the shofar almost 200 times because of people just coming in late, etc. Women showing up. So the question was, where did this come from? It used to be that these two practices were inseparable. What two practices? That the shofar is sounded in silent Shemona Esrei, and it leads up to 100 blasts. No one ever had an idea that somehow, if you don't blow the shofar during silent Shemona Esrei, you could still get up to 100 blasts. How can you do that? If you blow 30 during the repetition, you get 30 before the repetition and 30 during, for a total of 60. You're still short another 40 blasts. Like, for example, they do in all the young Israels in New York. What does it help to blow the shofar 40 times after the davening? Where did that come from? Where did we first see this as a compromised position that we're not going to blow the shofar during the silent Shemona Esrei, but somehow we will get in those 100 blasts? And this question was lingering with me for a very long time, because someone had to have come up with such a thing. And if you study, let's say, the classical halacha books, you're in a conundrum because you will not find such a thing. It's also a good question. Well, it's not such a good question anymore. Why do all these loyal Sephardim do against the Shulchan Aruch with this regard? But then again, I live among the Sephardim in the land of Israel, and if you pay close enough attention, you'll see that there's a lot of things they don't do like the Shulchan Aruch, which isn't bad. It just shows that, we follow the Shulchan Aruch except when we don't. So the question was, where did this come from? And this Erev Shabbos, I saw that someone who, for whatever reason, has a bone to pick and doesn't like what I just said now, and pointing out the history of this practice, that you pick your posek. He does not blow the shofar 100 times, and actually he's talking about that it's either 40 or 42 times. And if you want, get up to 72 or 70, which is still significantly less than 100. So where did this come from? And his thesis is that the practice has always been to blow 100. Minhag Yisrael pointed out that, it's mentioned in the Archon and Tosfos, and it's mentioned by the Shla. The Shla didn't create it. Well, indeed, I was just pointing out that the Shla reintroduced the idea and popularized it. Two, just because you can find it mentioned, it's also in the same breath rejected. Tosfos mention it and then reject it. The Shla mentions it and then says, but no one does it, and you don't necessarily have to do it. The Avnei Nezer, one of the classic Hasidic poskim, there's a shoot Avnei Nezer behind me to my left. He mentions this practice, and he also says, remember, the Avnei Nezer, if I'm not mistaken, writing almost 200 years ago, is saying that even the Hasidim, it's not the practice. He mentions, like the Magen Avram says, you shouldn't blow during sound Shemona Esrei. The Pri Megadim and the Mishnah Berurah were against adopting this practice. Where did it come from? Well, he's trying to say that no, but the fact that they mentioned it means it was Minhag Yisrael. Fine, that's not correct. But more importantly, and here's where it got funny. The Vilna Gaon himself, as I had written, had this practice. The Vilna Gaon had the practice of doing like Rabbeinu Tam and the Ramah. That's what he says you could do. Yet he's trying to claim that the Vilna Gaon himself blew the shofar 100 times, and the source brought was the Sefer Keter Rosh. And earlier this week, I was looking, wait a minute, Keter Rosh is not one of the more commonly cited sources about the Vilna Gaon's practice. The Keter Rosh, as a matter of fact, I couldn't find the bibliographies that, for example, Rav Tzuriel, the Baal HaOtzros, who wrote Otzros HaGra, did not bring that as one of the major sources for the history of the practices and opinions of the Vilna Gaon. So where did it come from? Why is he citing the Keter Rosh? And you could open up the Keter Rosh. I have it in front of me on the screen right now. And it indeed says that, I'll read the important part. He said that this is how we blew shofar. Wait, actually, I'm not up to the right page. I'll read it here inside. The Keter Rosh says that Tkiyot Rosh Hashanah Haya Noheg Keseder Hazeh. The blasts, shofar blasts in Rosh Hashanah, he used to do like this. Ready? Shloshim Yoshev, Ushloshim Yomed, Tashrak, Tashat, Tarat, Malchiot, Zichronot, Shofarot, Vachar Tfilah, Shalosha, Pamim, Kanal. Vachar Kach, Od Pam, Tashrak, Tashat, Tarat. He's saying we blew 30 before the Shemona Esrei, another 30 during the Sound Shemona Esrei, another 30 during the Chazarat Shots, plus another 10 afterwards. And that's how we got up to 100. And he says, Rabbeinu haya sameach meod be'eit tkiyat shofar. And Rabbeinu was very happy when we would sound the shofar and had a reason for that. So apparently this shows that the Vilna Gaon, how they blew the shofar with the Vilna Gaon. And then you look at the title page, and there's a reason why the Keter Rosh is not oft cited as source for the Vilna Gaon's practice. It's because it's about Rabbi Chaim Volozhner. And if you just read the first page, it's written by one of Rabbi Chaim Volozhner's Talmidim. And he already cites Rav Chaim Volozhner, Zatzah, who passed away some 20 years after the Vilna Gaon. And all these practices from the first page till the last are those of Rabbi Chaim Volozhner, not the Vilna Gaon. And this is basically saying that Rabbi Chaim Volozhner blew the shofar 100 times on Rosh Hashanah and does not tell us anything about the Vilna Gaon himself. And if you want to claim, well, the Rabbi Chaim Volozhner, Talmud of the Gra, he did everything like the Vilna Gaon, correct? No, he did not. That's already mentioned on the first page. If he did everything like the Gra, we just say, right one learned. Rabbi Chaim Volozhner was a close Talmud of the Gra. He did everything like the Gra, but he did not. He actually had different viewpoints on a lot of things. The best one is right at the beginning of the book. It gives you a classic difference of opinion between the two. The Vilna Gaon used to only wear Rashi tefillin. That's well known. The Vilna Gaon wore his Rashi tefillin all day, every day, and advocated as such. Why? Because the Vilna Gaon, when he took an opinion, he stuck with it. He knew that in this regard, Rashi and Rambam were correct, the Ra'avad and Rabbeinu Tam were not, and that's what he did. And he didn't look to satisfy the other opinions just to play it safe. Yet Rabbi Chaim Volozhner did. Rabbi Chaim Volozhner did wear Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. The Vilna Gaon disputed this with him. The Vilna Gaon pointed out that because of other major machlokas in the matter, if Rabbi Chaim Volozhner really wanted to play it safe and satisfy all the different opinions, considering all the mathematical permutations of the major machlokot, he would have to wear 24 pairs of tefillin every day to play it safe. And this became a little bit burdensome for Rav Chaim, and that's why he dropped the issue. And so he stopped wearing. It says that's when he stopped wearing Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. That's when he stopped. It didn't say he thought to wear Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, and the Vilna Gaon persuaded him not to. It says he stopped at that point. So you see that had it not been such a cumbersome idea to try to satisfy all these opinions, he would have done so. Why? Because Rabbi Chaim Volozhiner had a different viewpoint about the performance of mitzvahs. He had a Kabbalistic side to him, like the Vilna Gaon, but it actually devolved into practice that he wanted to play it safe. Remember, those who wear Rabbeinu Tam tefillin are usually of the Hasidic stripe. They're trying to adopt this pious practice. The Shulchan Aruch recommends it, for example. You don't find Ashkenazic or Litvish Rosh Yeshiva or Yekim wearing two pairs of tefillin. They don't own Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. They never put on Rabbeinu Tam tefillin in their lives, even if they wear tefillin all day long. They do like the Vilna Gaon. Rav Chaim did not. Rav Chaim had practices and ideas different than the Vilna Gaon. And in this case also, Rav Chaim apparently wanted to sound the shofar 100 times, so instituted this practice. And unlike everything else in this book, which is quite short, one sentence, one small paragraph, this paragraph is about 4 times as long as all the other ones, because apparently it's telling us for the first time, if this is the way they did it, basically this practice here is described, this is what we have in our Machzorim today. If this was the common practice, it could have just said, Rav Chaim blew the shofar like we do in the Machzorim, or like the Vilna Gaon did, or like anybody. No, this was new. Not only does this not show what the writer wanted to show, that the Vilna Gaon blew the shofar 100 times because the Vilna Gaon did not. This shows us that Rav Chaim himself blew the shofar 100 times, and it is showing us that Rav Chaim was the one who introduced the practice with which we are now familiar. And this answers the question I had. Where did this come from? Where did this idea that you can somehow blow shofar? Well, hold on, he says, yeah. Where did this idea happen that you could blow the shofar 30 times after Shemona Esrei, plus another 10, that is the leader's repetition of the Shemona Esrei, and that will satisfy this idea of getting up to 100 kolot with 100 shofar blasts without having to sound the shofar during the silent Shemona Esrei, which is, as Magen Avraham points out, very, very awkward and not according to the straight meaning of the Gemara. This is the source for it. So I have my disputant who to thank for this, for being misquoting the Sefer, but at least introducing me to it. So that's good. That's all we have for now. Next time, we're going to discuss also this idea, the history of how we keep Rosh Hashanah, the history of how it was kept, how it is kept, and how it will be kept, because, history is always changing. And I'd like to take this opportunity to wish everybody a happy and healthy new year. And don't forget, like, subscribe, share it with your friends, send your questions, comments, and as always, we'll see you next time.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.